Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in humanity, what if I told you that one man dreams of ruling the entire world? That his desire is not just political, but deeply psychological, rooted in something scientists say is as addictive as any drug. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not emotional rhetoric. What you're about to hear is based on real science, historical patterns, and verified behavior. We will explore how power changes the human brain, why some leaders become obsessed with dominance, and what scientists have discovered that will truly shock you. This is not just about Donald Trump. This is about a dangerous mindset that has emerged time and time again in human history, one that threatens the balance of the world. Stay with me, because by the end of this talk, you will not only understand the psychology behind this obsession with global control, you will also see why it always ends in failure. And more importantly, you'll realize what the world really needs in leadership today. Let us begin with logic, with evidence, and with open minds. Throughout the annals of history, one recurring theme has consistently echoed through the corridors of time: the obsessive desire of certain individuals to rule not just their own nations, but the entire world. This dream of global domination has manifested in various forms, from ancient emperors who style themselves as gods on earth to modern political figures who attempt to reshape global dynamics according to their vision. Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, has often been perceived, not just by critics but also by analysts and political commentators, as someone whose ambitions go beyond national leadership. His rhetoric, foreign policy strategies, and approach to global influence suggest a deeper inclination towards exerting dominance on a worldwide scale. To understand this phenomenon in a rational, scientific way, we must examine the psychological, historical, and socio-political factors that fuel such ambitions. Historically, we see that many rulers have attempted to impose their will across borders, from Alexander the Great, who marched across continents, to the Roman emperors who claimed the title of Dominus Mundi, Lord of the world. The quest for absolute power has always been present. But what drives a man to desire control over nations, peoples, ideologies, and systems? Science, particularly psychology and neuroscience, offers some fascinating studies in behavioral psychology reveal that the lust for power is not merely a political issue, but a cognitive and emotional state that can become addictive. In fact, researchers from institutions such as Stanford and Cambridge have studied brain scans of individuals in positions of power, discovering that power triggers the release of dopamine, the same chemical released during drug use or other forms of reward-seeking behavior. Dopamine is associated with pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement of behavior. When a person gains power, their brain rewards them with a sense of pleasure and control. If unchecked, this cycle can become a feedback loop where the individual continually seeks more power, not necessarily for the betterment of others, but to maintain the high that power brings. Scientists call this the power paradox. Initially, people may acquire power through good intentions, competence, or charisma, but as their power grows, their empathy and moral judgment often diminish. This has been demonstrated through various experiments where individuals in positions of authority made more selfish, riskier, or even unethical decisions compared to those without power. In the context of Donald Trump, multiple political psychologists have noted patterns consistent with what is termed dominance leadership style. This is characterized by a focus on control, submission-demanding rhetoric, a disregard for traditional norms, and a belief that one's own judgment supersedes that of institutions, advisors, or even scientific data. During Trump's presidency and post-presidency era, these traits manifested not only in domestic politics through attempts to discredit the judiciary, media, and electoral system, but also in his foreign policy. The frequent withdrawal from international agreements, threats to NATO allies, and direct engagement with authoritarian leaders underscore a worldview in which global relationships are transactional and must conform to the will of a single dominant power, preferably Trump's. This mindset is not isolated to Trump alone, of course. It is part of a broader human tendency. In evolutionary biology, dominance hierarchies exist across many species, particularly primates. The alpha male often rises through a combination of strength, strategic alliances, and intimidation. While human civilization has evolved laws, ethics, and institutions to mitigate raw dominance behavior, remnants of this evolutionary psychology persist in many leaders. Scientific studies on alpha leadership styles have shown that while such leaders may gain rapid popularity or control, their long-term effectiveness is often poor, as they fail to build collaborative and sustainable systems. Moreover, when a leader with a dominance orientation seeks control beyond his own nation, it becomes a global concern. History provides chilling reminders. Adolf Hitler envisioned a 1,000-year Reich. Napoleon sought to remake Europe. In both cases, the pursuit of global control led not to peace and progress, but to unprecedented destruction. The underlying psychology was similar: an inflated sense of self, a belief in personal destiny to rule, and a disregard for checks and balances. Modern psychology terms this grandiose narcissism, and numerous researchers have linked this trait to Trump. A study published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences found that leaders with high narcissistic traits are more likely to overestimate their abilities, underestimate threats, and reject expert advice. Such traits can be dangerous when the leader is in command of significant global power. In addition, cultural and historical conditioning also plays a role. The idea of American exceptionalism, that the United States has a unique destiny to lead the world, is a long-standing narrative in US political thought. Trump, however, reinterpreted this concept in an unconventional way. Rather than promoting leadership through cooperation or innovation, he often framed America's global role in terms of dominance, economic coercion, and military strength. His slogans such as "Make America Great Again" or "America First" were not simply calls for national pride, but also carried undertones of hierarchical superiority. They implied that other nations must follow or fall in line, reinforcing the notion of one nation or one man, seeking to dictate terms to the rest of the world. This form of thinking is also linked to what cognitive scientists call zero-sum reasoning, where a gain for one party is seen as a loss for another. Such a worldview makes global cooperation difficult and positions every international engagement as a contest for superiority. In this context, the dream of ruling the world is not just about influence, but about total control, with no space for mutual benefit or shared progress. This is contrary to the way scientific progress or global peace has historically evolved, through collaboration, open exchange of ideas, and mutual respect. Scientists studying social dynamics and global governance caution against centralized control by any single actor. The complexity of global systems, whether economic, ecological, or cultural, requires decentralized, adaptive leadership. No single person, party, or nation can effectively manage such complexity alone. Attempts to do so inevitably lead to system failure. Complexity science, a branch of systems theory, supports this claim. It shows that overly centralized systems become brittle and prone to collapse, while resilient systems are distributed and networked. Trump's approach to global issues, however, often ignored these principles. His administration withdrew from global climate agreements, ignored international scientific consensus on pandemics, and sought to replace multilateralism with unilateral dictates. This brings us to a deeper philosophical and moral question. Should any human being aspire to rule the world? Science does not merely provide tools for conquest. It also offers ethical guidance based on observed outcomes. Time and again, global domination has led to oppression, environmental destruction, and war. The scientific method, based on evidence and reproducibility, shows that power corrupts unless it is regulated by ethical checks and collective accountability. Leadership, therefore, should be viewed not as an entitlement to dominate, but as a responsibility to serve. Thus, the dream of world domination is not only impractical and dangerous, but also rooted in flawed understanding of human nature and global interdependence. From a scientific point of view, the world is a highly complex interlinked system where attempts at absolute control are both unsustainable and self-destructive. Whether through psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary theory, or system science, the evidence points to a clear conclusion. Those who seek to dominate the world often fail because they underestimate the complexity of the world and overestimate themselves. Scientific exploration into human behavior has revealed remarkable insights about how power affects the human mind and body. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this area comes from neuroscience, the realization that power functions in the brain much like a drug. This comparison is not metaphorical. It is grounded in biological mechanisms involving neurotransmitters, brain structures, and behavioral feedback loops. Power, when experienced and exercised frequently, can become addictive, leading individuals to seek more of it, regardless of the moral, ethical, or social consequences. This phenomenon is particularly relevant in understanding leaders like Donald Trump, whose pursuit of influence often transcends conventional political ambition and borders on compulsive domination. Scientists have studied this behavior and identified patterns that shock not only in their intensity but also in their predictability. When an individual gains power, certain parts of the brain become highly active, particularly those associated with reward and pleasure. The neurotransmitter dopamine, often referred to as the pleasure chemical, plays a central role. Dopamine is released when people experience something rewarding, whether it's food, money, praise, or a successful outcome. The brain interprets power as a similar kind of reward, which results in dopamine surges. These surges, like those produced by addictive substances such as cocaine or alcohol, reinforce behavior and create a loop of seeking and craving. The more one experiences power, the more one desires it, and the more one becomes dependent on it for feelings of satisfaction and identity. This is what psychologists refer to as power intoxication. It does not involve a physical substance, but it alters the brain in comparable ways. Studies conducted at major universities such as UC Berkeley and Harvard have shown that individuals in positions of authority over time demonstrate diminished capacity for empathy, increased risk-taking behavior, and a distorted sense of reality. In controlled experiments, people assigned positions of authority, such as being the boss, in a simulated work environment, began to talk more, interrupt more, and make decisions without consulting others. These behaviors are not just personality traits, they are neurological responses to power. When scientists scanned the brains of such individuals using functional MRI technology, they notice that the areas responsible for empathy and moral reasoning, like the medial prefrontal cortex, became less active. This neurological dampening means that powerful individuals literally feel less connected to others. In political terms, this can result in leaders who disregard the suffering of populations, manipulate information, and prioritize personal or nationalistic agendas above global welfare. Donald Trump's behavior fits neatly into this model. His tendency to dismiss expert advice, belittle opponents, and focus intensely on personal loyalty over merit are not simply political tactics. They may be symptomatic of power-induced psychological transformation. Furthermore, another critical aspect of this addiction is what researchers call hubristic pride. While authentic pride is based on genuine achievement and motivates constructive behavior, hubristic pride is inflated, defensive, and linked to arrogance and aggression. Leaders who are under the influence of power addiction often confuse these two. They interpret any criticism as a personal attack, any resistance as betrayal, and any failure as an injustice. This creates a hostile feedback loop where the individual surrounds themselves with sycophants, rejects uncomfortable truths, and increasingly isolates from reality. This isolation feeds into what some behavioral scientists call the power trap. It is the paradox where power, initially earned through competence, leads to behavioral changes that undermine that very competence. A leader begins to believe that their success justifies all actions and that their judgment is inherently superior. Scientific studies have even shown that prolonged exposure to unchallenged power can cause literal changes in brain structure. The neural pathways responsible for critical thinking, caution, and collaboration may weaken, while those linked to impulsivity and reward seeking become more dominant. In political terms, this has massive implications. A leader who is addicted to power may start to override democratic institutions, challenge legal boundaries, and even attempt to undermine electoral processes to retain control. In the case of Donald Trump, his refusal to concede defeat in the 2020 US presidential election and the subsequent Capitol Hill insurrection reflect an extreme manifestation of this condition. Political analysts and psychologists have identified in his behavior classic signs of power withdrawal: denial, aggression, delusion, and attempts at manipulation to regain the lost authority. It is comparable in clinical terms to an addict being deprived of their substance. Another disturbing dimension is that such power addiction is not self-limiting. Unlike physical addiction, where the body may give out or the effects become obvious, the psychological addiction to power can last indefinitely and grow more intense over time. It is often reinforced by followers and systems that reward authoritarian behavior. In Trump's case, media coverage, social media engagement, and political rallies acted as enablers, providing constant doses of validation. Each cheer from a crowd, each retweet, and each loyalist's praise acted as a mini injection of dopamine, reinforcing his belief in his own indispensability. Moreover, social psychology introduces the concept of illusory superiority, where individuals overestimate their own qualities and underestimate those of others. Combined with power addiction, this cognitive bias can lead to dangerous overreach. Leaders begin to believe that they alone can solve national or global issues, ignoring collaboration, expertise, and evidence. Trump's attitude toward the COVID-19 pandemic, questioning scientists, promoting unverified treatments, and pushing for premature reopening, reflects this pattern. His decisions were not just politically motivated, but also neuropsychologically influenced by a belief in his own infallibility, a belief fed by prolonged exposure to unaccountable power. The addiction model also explains why power-hungry individuals often refuse to retire or relinquish leadership voluntarily. Just as an addict fears life without their substance, a power-addicted leader fears irrelevance. They interpret the loss of authority as a loss of identity. This explains Trump's continued political activity even after losing the presidency, including campaigning for loyal candidates, questioning the legitimacy of future elections, and positioning himself for another presidential run. It is not merely strategic, it is compulsive. From a scientific and psychological standpoint, it becomes evident that unchecked power can distort not only the behavior but also the very cognition of a person. Power addiction leads to tunnel vision, where complex realities are reduced to simplistic binaries: friend or enemy, win or lose, rule or be ruled. This binary thinking, once embedded in the mind of a powerful individual, creates an existential urgency to dominate. It turns politics into personal survival and governance into a game of absolute control. When such an individual attains a position of global influence, the danger extends beyond national borders. This is where behavioral economics and global policy research intersect. Studies have found that power-driven leaders tend to make riskier foreign policy decisions, often without regard for long-term consequences. They are more likely to engage in conflict, impose unilateral sanctions, or abandon international agreements, all of which were features of Trump's presidency. Researchers at institutions like the Brookings Institution and Rand Corporation have published multiple analyses warning that such behavior destabilizes the international order and creates a precedent where personality overrides policy. Even more alarmingly, artificial intelligence researchers and future studies experts worry about the implications of power addiction in the age of rapid technological advancement. When individuals driven by dominance gain access to powerful technologies, whether surveillance systems, military-grade AI, or bioengineering, the risks multiply. A power-addicted leader might exploit these tools to entrench their rule, manipulate populations, and bypass accountability entirely. Scientists emphasize the need for ethical boundaries, regulatory oversight, and institutional checks precisely because the human brain, once addicted to power, is incapable of self-regulation. The shocking reality, then, is not simply that individuals like Donald Trump seek to rule the world, but that their brains may be biologically rewired to pursue that goal obsessively. This understanding transforms our view of political leadership from mere ideological difference to a neurological and psychological condition that must be managed and countered through systems designed to limit power and distribute responsibility. The dream of one man ruling the world is not just politically dangerous, it is scientifically unsound and mentally corrosive. It represents the clash between biological impulses and the delicate balance of human civilization. In light of everything we've explored, from the historical obsessions with control to the scientific evidence showing how power affects the human brain, it becomes clear that the dream of ruling the entire world is not only irrational but also deeply dangerous. Leaders like Donald Trump, whose behavior reflects signs of power addiction, serve as living examples of what happens when unchecked ambition meets global influence. Science tells us that absolute control leads not to unity or progress, but to chaos, collapse, and moral decay. The world is too complex, too diverse, and too interdependent to be ruled by a single man or ideology. True leadership lies not in domination, but in cooperation, humility, and service to humanity. And as science has shown us, even the mightiest of empires have fallen, because power, when divorced from ethics and accountability, becomes its own destruction. Thank you for your time, attention, and your quest for truth grounded in reason, evidence, and reflection. May you continue to seek knowledge with sincerity, challenge falsehood with wisdom, and stand always for justice, no matter who it is for or against. Good luck on your journey of understanding and sharing truth with the world. Peace be upon you.